I'm Brian Grant. I'll be introducing myself. How's everybody doing? Good? Okay, that's nice. So I should have a slide deck that will be appearing momentarily. Momentarily being defined in a variety of ways. One, two. Oh, you know what really helps with this is if Brian, the tech expert that he is, plugs in his HDMI cable. Real life triage. That's right. That's right. Okay. So there we go. Hey, that's nice. So I already asked how everybody was doing. The next thing I got to tell you guys about, this is very exciting. I figured out what a Twitter is. So I'm on Twitter now. Hooray! Brian Grant at BI, which wasn't taken, which is super duper good. I haven't posted anything yet, but I will, and it won't be political. It might be political, but I'll try and keep that to a minimum. So hey, let's talk about building SVG measures in Power BI. So let's fade in on our hero. Power BI, over the last several years, as many of you know, has become the industry standard for self-service BI. At this point, you basically need a reason not to use this tool. It creates beautiful-looking reports over very large sets of data with complex measures. Fantastic. The catch. In order to use open standards, there are two big features that are still not directly supported. These include small multiples, which is to say little chart grids, and Spark charts, which are sort of table row charts. Paul sort of talked about some of this stuff earlier. So all this stuff down here, right, these are the kind of things that you would love to have in your report, and right now it's very, very tricky to have them, right? So here you could do it in some other program that starts with a T. You can do it in Excel. How do you do it in Power BI? I don't know. Oh, wait, no, I do know. That's what I'm going to be telling you guys about, okay? So there are some great, what do you call it? What's that? Blogs? Well, there are great blogs. I was thinking of custom visuals. So there are some great custom visuals out there that do this kind of thing. But sometimes what you want to be able to do is you want to be able to take one of these small multiple visuals and stick it in an existing table. And that's what I'm going to show you guys how to do, okay? So for a long time, there was a hack that you could use, which was kind of nice, where you could actually take the text of an image. You basically go open the image up in Notepad, copy it, and drop it into a column in Power BI, and you could store the image in that column. And that was super cool, but it had one big drawback. That visual was completely static. It wasn't dynamic. So if a user clicked and sliced and diced and all that kind of stuff, nothing happened to your chart, which is kind of bad for a chart. We want charts that are dynamic. So when you interact with the report, the charts all change. Okay? That was kind of a bust. So back in the days of yore, in August of 2018, there was a release of Power BI that allowed measures to return images. Now the idea was you would have a dynamic URL that would go point to one of several images out on the web. And you could certainly use it for that, but one of the cool things that you could do is you could actually have Power BI build what was the code for an image, right? And even though it was supposed to be a URL, it would just render it just like that. It was super duper cool. And it allows you to produce visuals just like this. Let me zoom in here. So you can produce these kind of KPIs over here. So if you've got a percent to goal and you want to have, you've got the text, bad, great, okay, but what you really want are shapes like this. You could do stuff like that. And you could even do fancy stuff like this, where you've got these Sparklines. So across categories and educational levels, you could see how sales are doing over time. Very, very cool, okay? That's what I'm going to be showing you how to do. So let's talk about SVG. So if you know DAX, what is this SVG thing? Well, I'm going to start by my perfunctory Wikipedia quote. You have to have at least one of these per presentation. SVG stands for Scalable Vector Graphics. That's an XML-based vector image format developed by World Wide Web Consortium since 1999, according to Wikipedia. What does that really mean? So all this is it's a way of storing images that isn't pixel-based. So normally when you open up a BMP file or a PNG file or a GIF file or anything like that, the image is stored as a series of pixels or groups of pixels. And that's nice if you've got an image of a face or of a pretty sunset. But when you've got something really simple, like simple shapes and rectangles and circles and things like that, it's kind of an inefficient use of space. So they developed this standard called SVG, and what it lets you do is it lets you store images not on a pixel basis, but on a vector basis, which is to say you store shapes, and you store things like shapes and colors, squares, rectangles, things like that. And it comes in a little wrapper like this. So anybody ever open up a web page, look at the XML behind it, HTML behind it? Yeah, so it looks a lot like that. It's XML-based, right? So let's sort of dive into some of the stuff that's in here. So whenever you've got an SVG image, the first and last thing you're going to have is the opening and closing tags, right? This says, here's where the SVG image starts, and here's where it ends. This is also where we put things like how many pixels is it? This image is 100 pixels wide by, or 100 pixels wide by 100 pixels tall, right? And then inside of that canvas, that's where you put all of your shapes. And you can see this is quite human readable. So like, what do I have there? Big reveal, it's a circle, right? It's a circle with a center at 50 by 50 pixels, and R stands for radius with a radius of 30, right? It's also got all that color information down there. Additionally, you don't usually have an SVG image with just one shape. You've got multiple shapes. So all you have to do is take your little canvas and keep adding shapes one after the other, and they're going to draw them one at a time. So in this example, we've got a circle in the background, and then floating right on top of it is this little polyline, which is to say like a line with many segments. That's how it draws it. Does that make sense? Nodding heads. Very good. Okay, so the good news is that Power BI measures can parse SVG code and return an image, which is why I'm speaking to you today, right? A little trickier, you can use DAX to generate dynamic charts. I'll be showing you examples of that in a minute. So the bad news is it doesn't work automatically. So this code right down here that I've got right about here, this will work if I drop this into Internet Explorer, Edge, or Chrome, or something like that. It'll know exactly how to read it. However, Power BI won't. There's some stuff we have to do to it to clean it up. Let's look at those things, right? Here's all the stuff we got to add. Let's go through it one by one. Number one, we have to have opening and closing quotation marks, because DAX is its own language, and SVG is something completely different. So we don't pass in the code as is. We have to encapsulate it in a text string and say, this text string contains the SVG code. What that means is we have to take our code and put little double quotation marks at the start and at the end. Additionally, we have to start it off with this big, ugly block of text right here. This is a bit of header information. This just says, hey, by the way, everything that follows this is going to be an SVG image, right? So you don't even have to know what any of that means. You just copy it and paste it right at the beginning. Also, this is pretty darn important. If you'll notice inside of our code, right, we've got all these double quotation marks. The reason is originally they were just regular old double quotation marks, but as far as DAX is concerned, if it sees double quotation marks, it thinks that the text string is ending. But those quotation marks are actually part of the text string, part of the instructions. So we use double quotes to say, hey, Power BI, hey, DAX engine. When you see these things, that's actually part of the text string, right? Don't end it, okay? And lastly, for compatibility reasons, basically with Firefox, whenever you've got color information where you'd normally see something like pound, FF, here you use %23. That just makes sure that it works in Firefox, right? And lastly, once you've done all that good work, when you've got your measure, what you have to do is you have to tell Power BI, hey, guess what? This is an image measure. And that's pretty easy. You just select the measure, like here we've got this KPI measure. We head up to modeling, we go to data category, and we select image URL. Easy as that, okay? Then you get these nice shapes over here. So after that, sailing is pretty darn smooth, but there's still a few gotchas that you do have to keep in mind if you want to be doing this, okay? Number one, boo, hiss, no D3 support, okay? Anybody familiar with D3? D3 is a fantastic library that allows you to very quickly generate SVG images without nearly as many lines of code. It is fantastic, and it does not work in Power BI, sorry. I should say Power BI is actually built entirely on D3, but in this particular part of it, when you build the SVG images, you have to build them completely from scratch. No D3 helping you out, okay? Square images only. This kind of bums me out. As of today, I underline that as if it's going to change anytime soon. This might be around for a while. When you've got an SVG image, right, one of these DAX measures, what you'll see is, let me zoom in here so you can see it. If what you want to do is, oops, there's my mouse. If what you want to do is you've got like a bullet chart like this right here, and you want to stretch it out because you think that bullet chart should be nice and wide, so what you think to yourself is, oh, you know what I'll do? I'll set the height of the image to 100 and the width to 200 to stretch it out. What's Power BI going to do? It's just going to put a bunch of extra white space on the bottom. Oh, let me see it. Oh. There we go. White space right there, right? So that kind of stinks. If you want to make it wide, you can't do it yet. What you could do, though, is you can have these little gray rectangles in the background to sort of fake it and make it look like it's wider than it is, right? But that's not too bad. Also, grand totals do not work, right? So if you've got a lovely measure that generates these KPI shapes right here, right, what you will find is when you get to the grand total, it doesn't really do what it's supposed to do. It just drops the code in there. So the way that you fix this is pretty complex. You turn the grand totals off, right? That's how you solve that particular problem. Additionally, you could write some extra code that says, go check to see if I'm in the grand totals or even in the subtotals. And if you are, don't render it. But the easiest way to do it, just turn it off. Okay. So this one's a really fun one. So everybody here went through middle school at some point, I believe. And in middle school, if you were paying attention, you probably learned this idea of Cartesian space, even if you didn't know what it was. So if you've got an image that's 100 pixels by 100 pixels, a normal human being like you and me would assume that the bottom left corner, the position 0, 0, is right here in the bottom left, right? That's how we all learned it. Y equals mx plus b, that kind of stuff, okay? However, in SVG space, we do things a little bit differently. It's more like Microsoft Word. 0 by 0 is actually in the top left corner, right? So it draws this way down. Now, for a lot of measures that you'll create, this won't actually matter. But when you start having things like line charts, you're going to actually end up having to flip your image about the y-axis to make things look right. Okay? All right, blah, blah, blah. Plenty of introductions. Let's actually go build some stuff, shall we? Chart measure number 1, Magnum KPI. So what are we going to be doing here? We're going to be building some KPI visuals. How should it look? For every single row, we should have a little image, little glyph that says whether Vancouver, for instance, is doing really, really good compared to our goal, whether it's just doing okay, or whether it's doing terrible. Okay? That makes sense, and right now it's a little tricky to do in Power BI. I'm going to show you how to do it. So here's our plan. Our plan is we're going to create a KPI measure, right? And we're going to have 1, 2, 3 variables right here, and each one of these variables is just going to have our SVG image stored in these quotation marks, just stored right there, 1, 2, 3. And then we'll have a return variable that uses this KPI text measure, which returns either the value great if we're above our goal, okay if we're within our limits, or bad if we're below our limits. And so depending on whether we get great, okay, or bad, we'll return either this image, or this image. Does that make sense? Does that sound good? Do you guys want to see it? Okay, until I get a bunch of yeses, I'm going to sit here. Yes? Okay, good. Fantastic. Oh, that's not it. That's me zooming in. Okay. So I should say I've got 3 demos. I'm definitely going to get through 2 of them. I'm going to like to get through the 3rd. We'll see if we make it that far. This one's the easy version. Okay, this is the mild, spicy version. So I'm going to open up kpi.pbix. And if I start to make mistakes, everybody should move further and further back in the audience to make it harder and harder to read. Please go ahead and do that. Oh, wait. Okay. So here we are. We have this table. We've got a bunch of stores, and we've got the city they're in, what state or province they're in, and the country. We've also got the total sales and the total goal. And based on that, we've got an existing measure that says, hey, are we doing really bad, or are we doing great, or are we just doing okay? And what we want to get is a measure that builds these images right here, right? And if you hover over it, you can actually get a glimpse at the SVG code that we're going to write. There we go. Okay, so that's what we want to build. Let's go ahead and start building it. So I'm going to twirl open my measures table over here. Let me zoom in so you can see it. I'm going to right-click on it and do New Measure. Okay? And so I've got my new measure up here. I'm going to call it Magnum KPI. Okay? And just so we can see the whole thing, I'm going to twirl this open. Okay, so I'm going to create 3 variables, var, vr, great circle. And I'm just going to put, for right now, a little placeholder that says circle, exclamation marks. Var v OK diamond for if we're just doing OK, right? And that's going to be diamond, and maybe I'll do this, right? Not so great. And then I'm going to do var, oh, we already did great. I'm going to do bad rectangle. And for that, that's going to be rectangle. And let's do this, because it's very sad, okay? So eventually we're going to replace that with the actual images, but just so you can see how the mechanics works a little bit better, the next thing I'm going to do is create a return variable, right? And we're going to use the switch function. Does everybody know what the switch function does? Anybody want to come up here and explain it? So what the switch function does, right, it takes some expression, and based on the results of that expression, it returns one of several different options, okay? So the thing we want to test is a KPI text, right? So we're going to go call the KPI text measure, which is either going to return great, okay, or bad. And based on those 3 things, we'll return one of our images. So if we get great, well, I want to go ahead and show the great circle. If we're merely okay, I want to go ahead and show the okay diamond, right? And if we're really terrible and bad, I'm going to show the bad rectangle, okay? And now that I've defined all those variables, I'm going to create my return statement. I'm going to return that return variable and hit enter. Okay? So now, if I take that measure and drag it right in here, what we'll see is for every single row, we've got rectangle if we should show a rectangle, circle if we should show a circle, and diamond if we should show a diamond. So all we got to do is replace those text strings with the images, and everything's going to work just perfectly. So I'm going to click on this guy, make sure I've got it selected. And where are those images? Well, I've already got them built. So I'm going to open up kpi.txt. It's very handy if you have this stuff pre-built before you start constructing your measure. And so in here, what I've got is I've got the SVG snippets for every single one of those visuals. Up here, we've got a circle, right? The circle is centered at 50 by 50 and has a radius of 30. And we've got the opening and closing SVG tags. And notice we've also got our header information up here to tell Power BI, hey, guess what? This is an SVG image. The one thing we haven't done yet, though, anybody catch what it is? The bubbles. Double quotes, that's right. So we've got double quotes, but we don't need double quotes. We need double quotes. So I'm going to do Control-H to do find and replace. I'm going to replace my double quotes, double quotes, just like that. Okay? And now one by one, I'm just going to scoop these guys up and drop them into Power BI. Okay, so we got that guy. That is the circle. And I'm going to drop it here. We're going to lose our ecstatic text, but we're going to gain an image, so it will be worth it. And now we need the diamond. Let's pop back over here. Go get that diamond stuff. Oop. And drop it into diamond. Okay, and lastly, we're going to go get the rectangle. Okay, Alt-Tab over, scroll down, find the rectangle. There it is. Okay, Alt-Tab back over, head up here, and here where we've got the rectangle, we're going to drop that right in there. And now when I hit Enter, it's still not going to work, sadly, but we're awfully close. Okay, so now for every single row, we've got this bit right here, which certainly looks like valid SVG code, right? It looks like we should be able to parse this, and we can. We just haven't told it to do it yet. So our last step in this is we go to the measure, we head up here to modeling, and we head over here to data category, and we change this from uncategorized. Let me zoom in so you can see it. We change it from uncategorized to image URL. And boom, just like that, it works. I'll take a plus. Thank you very much. I got to take it now because if I mess up the next one, like it's all I'm going to get, okay? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close this guy. So that was the easy version. Did folks mostly follow that? Just lie to me. Tell me you did, even if you didn't. Yeah, mostly? Okay, good. I'm going to close this. So the next one's a bit more spicy. And it's also a bit more useful. Oh, shoot, I didn't even go through all this stuff. I'm sorry. Okay, 18 with a bullet chart. Bullet charts, you know them, you love them, and if you don't, you should know them and love them. Bullet charts are a fantastic way of showing actuals compared to goals. So even if I don't explain to you how this bullet chart works, my guess is you can look at that table right there and know exactly what you're supposed to understand from it, right? So over down here, we've got some actual values and the little pipe right there. That's our goal. So how well are we doing compared to our goal? So let's see how these things work, okay? So we're going to have multiple rows, right? And here we've got Vancouver and Camas, right? Each gray vertical bar represents that row's goal or target. So for Vancouver, here's what we were supposed to hit. For Camas, here's what we were supposed to hit. Each blue horizontal bar represents the row's actual value. Here's how much we did. Here's how much we did. And what's important is the right edge of the chart represents the single biggest value across all the charts, right? So for all these charts right here, I could say that this bar is a little bit bigger than this one because this value right here, this corresponds to the edge of the chart, the right edge of the chart. Okay? So how are we going to build this thing? Well, we're going to start with this SVG snippet down here, right, where we've got the canvas. We've set it to 100 by 100 pixels, make our math easy. And we've got three shapes inside there. We've got a background strip, which is that little thing right there. That's pretty easy. It's just a rectangle that starts at 0 by 25, 100 by 50 pixels. Then for the actual, that corresponds to this blue bar. It starts at 0 by 42, but the width is hashtag actual, okay? That's because we're going to have to substitute hashtag actual with the actual pixel, right? Likewise, for the goal, the X position is hashtag goal because we're going to have to sub out whatever the position is for that goal for every single one of these charts, okay? Does that make sense? Good, okay. Here's our plan. We're going to start by loading what I just showed you here into the base text. We're going to go get the actual position and the goal position. Then we're going to use a pair of substitute functions to swap out hashtag actual with the actual and swap out hashtag goal with the goal. Okay? And when we're done, we're going to just show that. So there's one thing that we haven't addressed yet, right? If I've got that bullet chart right there, and I know that that value is $600. How do I know what pixel that is, right? I don't know. I mean, I could just guess. But that's not a very mathematical way to approach things. So right now, this presentation has DAX. This presentation has SVG. There's only one thing out there possible that could make this more entertaining. You guys know what it is? It's on the tip of your tongue. I know it. You were really hoping we'd be talking about algebra today. That's right, algebra. That's what's missing. Don't worry, it won't be too bad. Okay, so if we know that that's $600, let's go through this, right? We know that's $600. We know that the image starts both at 0 pixels and $0. We also happen to know that the single biggest value across all of our charts is $800, okay? So if we know that it's 100 pixels to get all the way across the image, and we also know that it's $800 to get all the way across the image, and we know that we're currently $600 across, we can divide 600 into 800 and get 75%. That's how far across the image we are. And if we know we're 75% of the way across, and there's how many pixels in this image? 100. You guys are paying attention. That makes me so happy. 75 pixels, right? Simple as that. For the goal, we're going to do the same darn thing. Yeah, so here's what we do. We get the biggest value, actual or goal, right? That's the right side of the image. We get that row's actual value. We divide the row's actual value by the biggest value to get the percent across. We multiply that by 100, which is the width of the image, to find our pixel number, right? Just like that. For the goal, we do the same darn thing, right? We figure out that it's $800 to get all the way across. Still, it's $300 to get to the goal because that's what our goal was. We divide 300 into 800, get 38%. 38% of 100 pixels is 38 pixels. That's how we're going to solve that problem. DAX, SVG, and algebra together at last. Okay, enough talking. Let's do this. So let me go pull this open. Pull open bullet.pbix. What was that? Can any guesses as to what I'm going to call this measure, by the way? The name of the thing is a bullet. Am I going to guess? Going once, going twice, going thrice. We're going to name this measure McQueen, of course. And there's 3 people in the audience that know what movie I'm talking about, but that's okay. The 4 of us will be highly entertained. So, hey, just a reminder of what we're doing. We've got a bunch of stores here, and rather than just having shapes, we're going to have these bullet charts to say, hey, there's our goal, and there's our actual. And we're going to encapsulate that information in a measure called McQueen. Okay. So, let me twirl this open so we can read it. First thing we're going to create is our base text variable. Okay, what's the base text? Well, thankfully, like before, I've got that pre-done. So I'm going to Alt-tab over here, open up bullet.txt, and what we'll see, just sort of like I showed you, we've got our SVG image, we've got the background strip, the actual bar and the goal line, and where we need actual values, we've got pound actual and pound goal. Those are the things we're going to sub out. So before I could copy and paste this into Power BI, what do I have to do again? You guys already told me once. Tell me one more time. Double quotation marks. So we'll replace our double quotation marks with double quotation marks. I just like saying double. Close that. Control-A, Control-C. Pop back over to Power BI. And drop that right in there. Okay, let me clean up some of this extra white space. I don't need all this. All right. So now that we've got our base text, we need actual values and goal values. And to get that, we're going to start by figuring out what the far edge of our chart is. Remember, the far edge of the chart is the single biggest value, whether that's an actual value or a goal value. And to figure that out, we're going to need to know what all of our different rows are. Now, in this example here, every single row corresponds to a store. So I'm going to go ahead and get a table called VR stores. And this is going to be all selected stores. So all the stores we've got selected, I want to store those into a table. Okay? So we've got a table with all the stores that we're looking at, right? Not just this row, all the stores. Okay? And so what I want to know is what's the biggest value across all those stores. So let's start by getting the biggest sales. Okay? And the biggest sales is going to be a max X. So go over VR stores, and for every single store, I want you to go calculate the total sales and bring back the biggest one. That's going to be the single biggest total amount, right? So likewise, I'm going to create a variable called VR biggest goal, and that's going to be also a max X, also over VR stores, and also using the total, well, not also, using the total goals measure. That's the only difference between these two things, okay? So on each one of these lines, I'm going to go through all the stores, get all the sales, get the biggest one, get all the goals, get the biggest one, and now all I got to do is figure out between these two numbers which one's the biggest, and to do that, I can use my old favorite function biggest value is what I'm going to call this thing. I'm just going to use the max function. So most of you are either using this too little or too much. Traditionally in Power BI, when you use the max function, what are you pointing at? A column, right? And it tells you what's the biggest value in that column. You probably didn't know that you can actually give it 2 arguments or multiple arguments, which are a bunch of numbers. And if you do that, it'll give you the biggest number of all the ones that you've given it. Okay, don't do this too much, but it's kind of fun to do it occasionally. So we're going to get our biggest, let me scroll down so I can actually see, the biggest goal and the biggest sales. It'll tell us between those which one is the biggest. Okay, this is the single biggest dollar amount. This is the far right edge of all of our charts. Okay, so with that, we can go get our actual position and our goal position. I'm going to put dummy numbers in there now. Okay, so to get these guys, here's what we're going to do. We're going to start up here with actual. We're going to take the total sales, right? And what we're going to do is we're just going to divide it by the biggest number. That'll tell us what percentage of the way across the chart are we. So we divide that by the biggest value, right? And after we're done doing that, we then say, well, okay, that's the percentage of the way across the chart. If there's 100 pixels in the chart, we multiply that by 100. That'll tell us how many pixels we are across. Now, since we're dividing, there's going to be all this ugly stuff after the decimal point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the int function to lop off all that stuff after the decimal point, right? Boop, 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 just like that. Okay, and I'm going to do the same darn thing for total goal. So now's a good time to refresh your coffee, right? So we're going to take the total goal. We're going to divide it by the biggest value to figure out what percentage of the way across the chart that goal is. Okay? We're going to take that number. We're going to multiply it by 100 to figure out how many pixels we are across. And because I'm a stickler for nice round numbers, I'm going to lop off all the decimal points by using the int function. Okay? Okay, so now I should have both my actual and my goal position. And in a minute, we're going to sub those out into our SVG code up there. But I want to start just by looking at them. So let's just do that. I'm going to return my actual position, a comma and a space, and then I'm going to take my goal position just to see if what we're doing makes any sense and is halfway correct. So I'm going to go ahead, hit enter. And on the newest build, sometimes it lets you hit enter on these things. Other times it does not. Twirl this closed. So I'm going to take McQueen over here and just drop it on my chart. And boom, there we go. For every single row, we've got the actual and the goal position, thereabouts. 28 pixels and 42 pixels. So assuming this is 100 pixels wide, does that seem about right? Yeah, more or less. 28 and 42. If I come down here, we've got 29 and 58. 58's a little more than half. That sounds right. 29's about a third of the way across. That sounds right, too. So all we got to do is take these two numbers and stick them inside of our SVG code. So let's do that. Click on McQueen here. All right. So I'm going to come down here just to remind ourselves. We're going to take those numbers and put them in here for hashtag actual and here for hashtag goal. So let's create a variable called vrReturn. Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to use the substitute function. We're going to take our base text, right? And anywhere where you see the text string hashtag actual, I want to replace it with my actual position. Okay? Now, unfortunately, you can't pass 4 or 5 arguments. So in order to swap both these, we're going to have to call substitute twice. We just subbed out the actual. Now we're going to sub out the goal. So I'm going to take this right here, hit tab, indent it, and call substitute one more time. And now we're going to swap out anywhere where it says hashtag goal. We're going to swap that out with our goal position, just like that. Okay, and I even wrote a little note to myself on my laptop. After you do this, be sure and change what it says after return. Right? Otherwise, it won't be right. What's that? Oh, no. So what we're going to do, thank you for asking. What it's going to do is it's going to grab VR base text here, right, at line 21. Substitute's going to swap out hashtag actual with the actual. Then it's going to pass the results of that substitution into my second substitute function. That's how it's going to work. Or I think it's how it's going to work. Okay, do you want to find out? Yeah, sure. Let's find out. Okay, hey, I can't read that, but it sure looks like SVG code to me, doesn't it? That looks like semi-valid SVG code, and if we zoom in just a smidge, what we'll see is where it said all that ugliness about hashtag actual and goal, we've replaced it with real-life widths and real-life positions, okay? So the last thing we're going to do here is tell Power BI, hey, guess what? This is an image, so we click on the measure, pop over to modeling, and we change, oh, I'm zoomed out so you guys can't see. We go to modeling. We go to data category, and we turn this into an image URL. It's not really a URL. It's actually just an image. And it looks just like that. Okay? Make sense? Good. Now, thank you. I get 2 applauses. 2 out of 3 ain't bad. If I zoom in here, there's one little adjustment I'm going to make. If we look on this one right here, what we'll see is that this is the single biggest value right here. Just hint, hint, that's what it is. Notice how it hits the very edge of the chart. It's not mathematically wrong. I think it's a little awkward to look at, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a little bit of breathing room. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to open up my code here, right? And here where I'm stretching it out over 100 pixels, I'm going to stretch it out over 90 instead, right? I'm going to make it look just a smidge nicer. Okay, yeah, that looks just a little bit better. Cool. All right, so I'm supposed to be asking Greg. We've done our 2 demos that we got. Do we got time? 10 minutes, all right. I'm going to burn through this last one in 10 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. I'm going to go ahead and close my text right here. Don't save. Okay, so for my last trick, we're going to be talking about Sparklines, okay? So Sparklines are fantastic. I love them. What they do is they show you trends over time, okay? Since we're a little short on time, I'm going to skim through some of this stuff. You guys know what a sparkline looks like. Look, it's just a line chart for a row in a table. Hooray, fantastic. Like before, we're going to take our base SVG, and there where it says hashtag points, we're going to sub in a bunch of XY coordinates, okay? Now, what we're going to have to use is we're going to have to use something called a month counter column. The idea being if we use a month value that looks like this, 201707, if we try and do math on those numbers, they're not going to work. So we need a column where every single month is 1 month after the previous month, right? So if I go for, what is this, September of 2017, that's exactly 1 more after August, okay? We're going to need that to make our math work. Okay, there's a bunch of stuff in here, and I'm going to show you all of it. This is the same sort of algebra we did before with one big twist. The big twist is this. Before, our chart was starting on $0, right? Now it's actually starting on whatever the lowest sales was, okay? So it could be that our lowest single value is $1,000. Our chart doesn't start at 0, it starts at 1,000, okay? All right, since we're short on time, I'm just going to go ahead and burn through this, okay? Hopefully we'll have a lot of fun in the process. I'm going to open that up. So unfortunately, I didn't have sufficient time to come up with a good name for this particular measure. So we'll be going with, should say, there we go, okay. So we've got all of our subcategories. This is AdventureWorks data. For every single one, we've got sales over time right here for the months that we've got selected. So I could deselect a month, and it redraws all the charts. And I could click on stuff here, and it redraws everything. Hey, cool. So, okay, so the name of this measure is going to be Sparks and Recreation. Thank you. Sparks and Recreation. Okay. I don't want to tell you. It's not flattering how long it took me to come up with that. All right. So let's start by creating our base text. Base is a text. Okay. And I'm going to pop out here. You guys get the idea here. I'm going to do Control-H to do find and replace. I'm going to replace all of my double quotation marks with double quotation marks. Right? In-N-Out Burger. In-N-Out Burger. Ooh. Double. Yeah, that's good. I like that one. I hear they have them in Oregon now. It's kind of exciting. That's right. Okay, so I'm going to drop that in there, right? And I'm going to remove this white space. Okay, so to start off with, what I'm going to need is I'm going to need a list of all the visible months, all the months that we're looking at that are currently selected. Okay? So to do that, I'm going to create a variable called months, and I'm going to use a boring old values call. And I'm going to go to dim dates and go to the month counter. And I'm going to get a table of all my months, all the different months that I'm looking at. I've got 5 selected. This table should have 5 rows in it, right? Now I need the edges of my chart, both in months, which is left to right, and in dollars, bottom to top, okay? So let's start by getting our lowest selling month. This is going to be the bottom of the chart. So this is going to be not a max X, a min X, right? So we're going to go over all of our months. For every single month, I'm going to go get the total sales, and I'll bring back the lowest one. Okay? That's the bottom of the chart. Let's get the top of the chart. That's going to be sales max. That's going to be a max X, right? Also over VR months, also over total sales. This time it's just a minimum. So we've got the lowest value and the highest value, the bottom and the top of the chart. Now I got to figure out the sales range. How many dollars does it take to get from the bottom to the top of the chart? Well, that's just the biggest value minus the smallest value. Okay? So let's do the same thing for months. VR month min. That's going to be a min x, min xx. We're also going to go over VR months. This time, instead of getting total sales, we're just going to get the actual month number. Whoops. There we go. So go through all the months. For every month, get that month's number and figure out which one's the smallest one. That's the far left of the chart. Let's get the month max, the far right of the chart, which is going to be a max x. What's the biggest month? What's the last month in the chart? Go over VR months, get the month counter for each one, and bring me back the biggest one. And just like before, now we need the month range, which is going to be the biggest month minus the smallest month. Okay, with those edges of the chart, we could start building our XY pairs. Now, we want them in a text string, but before we put them in a text string, we're going to put them in a table. So here's that table. We're going to create a variable called VR points table, and we're going to use the add columns function. So what add columns does is it takes a table and it adds some columns to it. So we're going to get our months table, which has however many months we have selected. If we have 5 months selected, it will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows, right? And we're going to add 2 columns. The first column is going to be called X position, whatever the X position is. And for right now, let's put in just the month number, right? We'll fix that in a second. And we'll also put in the Y position, right? And that's going to be the total sales. Okay, so now that we've got that new table that's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows and 2 extra columns, one for an X position and one for a Y position for every single month, we need to turn that table into a text string. To do that, we're going to use my old friend. We're going to start by defining a variable called points text. And I'm going to use my old friend, concatenate x. Okay? So what are we going to do? We're going to go over my points table, and for every single row, for every single month, what I want you to do is I want you to get to the X position. I'm going to add a comma and a space. I then want you to get the Y position, right? And once you've got all those XY pairs, between each one, I want you to put a line break, which is Unicard 10. That means line break in DAX. Okay, just to make sure we're clear, we want to make sure we order these things by month. The first month comes first, right? And now we've got all of our XY pairs. We need to fix this bit right here, but we're pretty darn close. So let's go ahead and see what that looks like. VR points text. Just see where we're at right now. Okay, so if I take Sparks and Recreation, which you guys were happier with than I thought you would be, what we will see is for all these guys, we've got all the months, 97 through 101, which is what I have selected, January through May, which is 97 through 101. And for everyone, we've got the month number, and we've got the total sales. We have to convert these month numbers to actual XY coordinates. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to do it a little expeditiously. Greg, am I over time yet? I got this. All right. I'll be fast, I promise. Okay, so to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to take the current value of each row, and we're going to subtract the smallest value. How many months are we over the first month? Right, so we're going to subtract that from the first month, and we're going to subtract the lowest sales from our total sales. That's how many are we above the lowest value and past the left side of the chart. Okay? We're going to take those values and divide it by the range, which is to say, how many months does it take to get all the way across the chart? Month range. Right? And down here, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to divide this by the sales range. Okay? So this is going to give us what percentage of the way are we across the chart. And if we know what the percentage is, and we know that the chart is 100 pixels wide and tall, we can multiply this by 100, multiply this by 100, scoot over so we can see it, and that's going to give us our pixel value. And I'm going to lop off any ugly decimal points, because I don't like decimal points. I can't be bothered with decimal points. Okay, and if I hit enter right there, sometimes this takes a second to take. Okay. And shrink that. Now we can see for most of these guys, there's a couple problems. But for this guy right here, we've got all of our XY coordinates. Okay. The problems are is these guys don't have any sales, so let's fix that real quick. I want to hide any visual for that row if that row doesn't have any sales associated with it. So down here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, go check to see if total sales for this row is greater than 0. If it is, go ahead and show the visual. If not, show blank. Okay? Should hide all those guys. And since I've got all those XY coordinates and I'm a little short on time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all those XY coordinates and I'm going to stick them in that SVG code. That SVG code that's been hanging out here patiently this whole time. So I'm going to take that text and drop it in right here where it says hashtag points. So I'm going to create a new variable called vrReturn, which is going to be a substitute. We're going to go take our base text. We're going to go find anywhere where it says hashtag points, just the one spot, and we're going to replace it with our points text. Okay? And when I hit enter, I haven't changed my return even though I made a note on my laptop to do that. So let me do that. Return. Okay, so if I resize this, we'll see we've got my SVG code right there, ready to go. Okay? So I'm going to take that measure, I'm going to come up here to data category and turn it into an image URL. And what we will find is that we're quite close. You guys remember that thing a ways back where I said in regular math class, the charts start at the bottom left corner, but in SVG they start at the top left corner? We got to flip this thing, right? It's perfect, but we got to flip it. We also got to compress it a little bit. So I'm going to do both of those at once, just to show you that I can. Okay. I know. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take my Y position, and I'm going to, if I know it's 100 pixels, I'm going to take whatever that value was and subtract it from 100, right? Now, because I want to sort of scrunch it a little bit, rather than spreading this across 100 pixels, I'm going to spread it across 50 pixels. But when I do that, that means there's these 50 unused pixels. So I want to center it, and to center it, I'm going to subtract it by 25. I did a better job explaining this earlier, sorry. You guys can travel back in time and watch me do this earlier in the day. You'll have a nicer experience. Okay, and with that, we've got our visuals. Hey, we made it all the way through. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Do we have time for questions?
Yes.
Okay.
We got some time. Questions? Or everybody got that, right?
So who wants to come do it next? Questions? No? Yes. Oh, you want to come do it next?
I'm guessing everybody's hungry because we just refreshed all the food. So if you'd rather do that than questions. Yes.
I will make this available on our website, right? Yep.
It'll
absolutely.
all be on the Power BI UG website for the files, and then this is going to be recorded so you can go through it again. And I think you already have a blog post.
Yeah, so for this one right here, we actually have a video already up on YouTube that you can watch. It won't be as exciting as watching me do it live, but you can watch it.
Yeah.
And I'll do a better job explaining those last little bits where I'm like, how much time do we got?
Yeah. Let's give them a hand.
Thank you. Thank you very much.